Hi, my name is Lauren, and I'll be presenting today with Jacob and Dylan about the HR issues surrounding the death of George Floyd.
On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed by Officer Derek Chauvin, who was an officer for the Minneapolis Police Department. The death was recorded on a phone and quickly became a viral video on Facebook and other platforms. Officer Derek Chauvin was arrested on May 29th, charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. After the incident went viral on social media, stations nationwide were talking about the case, and people everywhere were outraged. The incident raised many questions about the HR issues in regards to George Floyd. HR should intervene and make sure officers have the proper training. HR is the one that writes the policies regarding using force on suspects. So why was Chauvin able to use such restraints in the first place? Why did the MPD fail to adopt police reform policies and remove Chauvin from duty? These are all questions people have in regards to George Floyd's death and HR issues that played a role in the incident.
Previous uses of excessive force, a thing for many of the officers. Chauvin and Tao had internal affairs complaints, and Chauvin had a history of working in the nightclub industry with actually George Floyd, and his previous boss said he was very aggressive to black clubgoers. And of the 18 active complaints levied against the officers, only 2 were closed with discipline. And Tao had been they settled for $25,000 out of court because the other officer had beaten a man who was handcuffed to the point of hospitalization. And the PD had a history of violence and brutality too, and excessive force. Keith Ellison, a former Minnesota Attorney General and U.S. Congressman, said it's ingrained into the culture of the police department. And they've had attempts to cover up the video before it went viral. History of cover-ups with situations like Stephen Porter being victimized. 2 officers beat him. And Minneapolis, excessive force is statistically more prevalent against black people. You can see on the statistics that gunpoint and neck restraints and dogs is often much more used against black people in the Minnesota Police Department. And local reporters like Todd Bayer detail how the Minneapolis PD is more prone to excessive force than other areas. Now, the charges filed, all officers were arrested, but the rookie on the far left got out almost immediately. Chauvin stayed, but his charges were eventually levied down from murder. And Tao only spent about a month in jail. Since then, 48 bills have been made by state legislators involving the incident and trying to instill reform. Many, over the safety issues, many police departments are actually demanding more force and different rules of engagement because they felt they weren't safe. And by July, 65 of Minneapolis's officers had retired or quit due to the situation. And over 100 cities have called for more police accountability. Of the officer conviction rates of the 15,000 deaths, only 150 officers have been charged since 2000. Very few convictions, for 50% less likely to be convicted of something they're charged for. And often out-of-court settlements are used, like in the case of the $25,000 with the Thao officer. And families are often too poor to decline or continue legal battles.
Following George Floyd's death, we saw many protesters calling for defunding of police budgets and reallocating the funds. Many major U.S. cities, such as New York and Los Angeles, did meet those demands. However, Austin, Texas has made the largest cuts of any major U.S. city. What has been done in Austin is decreasing the amount of new cadets coming in, trimming overtime, and cutting miscellaneous spending, and reallocating those funds to internal affairs, forensic departments, homeless services, mental health services, and other social programs. During the 1920s, the KKK was very prevalent in both the North and South in the United States. Members of the KKK were also members of the local police and sheriff's departments in some cities, creating radical injustices towards the African American communities. We saw a lot of protesting during this time. Martin Luther King Jr. was a very prominent member of the civil rights movement in the United States. He spoke about police violence and injustices on many occasions, including in his I Have a Dream speech. He stated, "We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality." Around the same time, we also saw protesting from college students, like Gen Z is right now, with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They protested civil rights issues during the civil rights movement. We also saw the end of segregation in the mid-1960s. Gen Z has used social media as a platform during their protests that have allowed them to reach millions of people across the United States. People can no longer ignore the injustices that African American people and people of other marginalized groups face from the police. Gen Z is very outspoken in challenging their elders and changing beliefs surrounding the equality of marginalized groups. One of the focuses of their protesting has been to truly level the playing field, coming together to end systemic racism by calling for the ways schools, cities, and economic structures look. Many police forces are having trouble retaining members of marginalized groups as well as recruiting young members. There are a number of factors that play into this, and one major one is the current mindset between members of society and the police force. It seems that many view they cannot be a member of the police force and also be a member of their community because they are not seen as something that can exist together cohesively. Applicants have dropped by 50% in many major US cities such as Seattle. We see new recruits demanding more training and transparency within the police force, as well as increased minority instructors, anti-racism trainings, as well as inclusion trainings. We also are seeing the demand for more officer accountability and close relationships with the communities that the officers work in. It's very clear that Gen Z will not be the type of officers that will tolerate injustices taking place.